One of the most important things for facilities is the materials factory, because that will produce the construction materials you need to build most other facilities. To build a material factory, you need foundations to place it on, you need a construction vehicle and 200 BMATs. If we hop into the CV and we press a B to open the build menu, if we come to the facilities category, we can see if we hover over the materials factory that it is indeed a 200 basic materials and a CV. And we can see that we need 2 megawatts of power to be able to use the standard recipe in the materials factory, which turns a salvage into construction materials. To place a materials factory, we left click on the icon of the materials factory, and this will put a blueprint of the materials factory underneath our mouse cursor. As with any other building, if we hold down the right mouse button, we can change the orientation of the building. On the right side of the building, we can see that there is an inlet. That inlet is meant for petrol, because there is an upgrade for the materials factory that uses petrol for its recipe. On the other side of the building is the connection point for power. That is where we connect our materials factory to our power grid. When we are happy with our orientation and location of our materials factory, we left click to confirm the position. As we'll place down the blueprint, we drive up with our CV and hold down the left mouse button to build the materials factory. When the materials factory is ready, we can come close to it and press E to open its menu, and we can see that we have a one recipe that turns a 20 salvage into one construction material over the course of 25 seconds with a power requirement of 2 megawatts. We can also see that we have a stockpile on the right side that will stockpile the items we produce in the materials factory and the items we need. To supply the materials factory with a salvage, we can have salvage in our backpack. Come close to the materials factory and press E to open its menu. We can see in the bottom left is our backpack with the salvage. In the top right is the stockpile of the materials factory. We want to bring the salvage from the backpack to the stockpile. To do that, we right click on the salvage in our backpack and left click on submit all to stockpile, and that will put the 100 salvage into the stockpile of the materials factory. We can do the same thing with a truck or dump truck full of salvage. We drive it close to the materials factory. We press E to open its menu, and we can right click on the salvage and either click submit all to stockpile, or if we want to have a specific amount of salvage to the stockpile, we can go submit to stockpile. That presents us with a bar where we can determine how much salvage we want to bring to the stockpile. So if it is 805 salvage that we want to bring to the stockpile, we select that on the bar and click submit, and that will put 805 salvage from our dump truck into the stockpile of the materials factory. We obviously want everything, so we just right click on the salvage icon and hit submit all to stockpile. And the last way of doing it is with the help of a small gauge train that has a small gauge minecart with salvage in it. We hop into our locomotive and drive till we're close to the materials factory, and it says in the bottom left, press E to use materials factory. We press E. In the menu in the bottom left, we get all the inventories of our train. That is the locomotive, the minecart, and our flatbed cart. The salvage is in the minecart, so we go to the minecart and the same procedure as before. We right click on the salvage icon and then left click on submit all to stockpile, and that will pull our minecart empty. Right now, our material factory is not producing anything. We can see that the status bar on our recipe isn't doing anything, and that is because if we come to the status panel, that we don't have any power currently. So we need 2 megawatts of power. We have a 0 in the network network we are connected to, so we need to turn on the power. So we come to our power station over here, press E to open it, and we start producing power. As soon as power is on in our power station, we can see that our materials factory starts producing. We can see that by the status bar that is going, the timer that is going down, and as soon as the timer hits 0, it will restart the timer and we will have gained 1 construction material in the stockpile. You can retrieve the materials from the stockpile while standing by just clicking on them, and that will start assembling them in your backpack. You can also resubmit them back into the stockpile by right-clicking on them and left-clicking on Submit All to Stockpile. You can grab them with your train that has a flatbed cart. So if you go to the flatbed cart inventory, you can click on the construction materials, and that will transfer materials over from the stockpile to your flatbed cart. And you can do the same procedure with a truck. In the upgrades panel, we can see that there are 4 different upgrades available for the materials factory. There is the forge, which will turn a salvage and coal cokes into assembly materials type 1. There is the recipe that turns 20 salvage and 150 liters of petrol into assembly materials type 2. There is the metal press, which is a more efficient way of making construction materials. It uses 20 salvage and 25 liters of petrol to make 3 construction materials. There is the smelter, which is basically the same thing as the metal press, but the difference is instead of petrol, it uses coal cokes. And there is the recycler that will produce 1 construction material and 5 sandbags, or 1 construction material and 5 barbed wire at a cost of 25 salvage. The recycler is the odd one out because it is the only upgrade that requires basic materials and not construction materials. To upgrade it, you need to have the necessary materials for the upgrade in the inventory of the materials factory. So if, for instance, we want to have the recycler upgrade, we need 50 basic materials in the inventory of the materials factory. So we have 50 basic materials in our backpack. If we shift click, that will bring it to the inventory of the materials factory. And if we then come to the upgrades panel and we go to the recycler, if we are sure that that is what we want, we left click the recycler upgrade and we can see that we are modifying the structure. As soon as we're done modifying the structure, we can see that the model changed, and if we open up the materials factory, we can see that we gained the 2 extra recipes that come with the recycler. So there is still the standard recipe that turns 20 salvage into 1 construction material. So to make sandbags, we just simply click the switch behind the sandbag recipe, and that switches that recipe on and will turn the other recipes off. With this recipe on, we will gain 1 construction material and 5 sandbags every 25 seconds, as long as we provide the materials factory with power and salvage. When we have enough sandbags, we can change the recipe to make barbed wire. For that, we simply click the switch behind the barbed wire recipe, and that will halt the production of the sandbag recipe and start the barbed wire recipe. The forge upgrade to a materials factory, as we can see, gives us 2 recipes. One recipe is 20 salvage and 180 coal cokes, making a 1 assembly material type 1. And the other recipe is 20 salvage plus 150 liters of petrol will make a 1 assembly material type 2. In order for the assembly material type 1 recipe to work, we need to make sure that there are coal cokes in the stockpile of the materials factory. So we grab coal cokes into our backpack, or do this with a truck. Come close to the materials factory, press E to open its menu, and then right click in the inventory where the coal cokes are, and left click on submit all to stockpile. That will put the coal cokes into the stockpile of the materials factory. If we now turn on the recipe for assembly materials type 1, and we check the status bar, we can see that we need 2 megawatts and we have 2 megawatts. In the recipe, we can see that the progress bar is moving to the right, which means that our recipe is in progress. Once the recipe is done, we can see that we got a assembly material type 1 in the stockpile of our materials factory. If we now want to make assembly material type 2, we can switch the recipe by clicking the switch behind the assembly material type 2 recipe. This will turn off the other recipe and turn on the recipe for assembly material type 2. As we can see, currently it's not doing anything. The progress bar is stuck, and that is because if we look in the status panel, there is no petrol in the materials factory. So if we supply the materials factory with petrol, it can start the recipe for the assembly materials too. We grab some petrol from the truck, press tab to open our inventory, and click on one of the jerry cans so it goes into our equipment. We press 3 to equip the jerry can of petrol and hold down the left mouse button, and that will start refueling the materials factory. So as soon as this hits 150, we should see a change. We can see that the factory comes to life, and if we open the menu of the factory, we can see that the progress bar on the assembly material type 2 is moving. You can supply petrol by using a fuel truck as well, or using a static fuel container. The metal press upgrade for a materials factory gives you the extra recipe, which changes a 20 salvage and 25 liters of petrol into 3 construction materials, but at the cost of 4 megawatts. To produce this recipe, make sure that there is petrol in your materials factory, and if you have that, you can simply click the switch behind the recipe, and that will start making that recipe every 25 seconds for as long as there is salvage, power, and petrol.